The wagon wheels groaned against the rutted dirt road as Clara Winslow approached Dust Rock for the first time in 10 years. Spring of 1889 had brought early wildflowers to the Montana plains, their yellow heads nodding in the breeze like old acquaintances she wasn't sure would remember her. She shifted on the hard wooden seat, her gloved hands tight on the reins of the borrowed mare pulling the modest wagon. Behind her, secured with rope and covered with oiled canvas, sat everything she owned, a trunk of simple dresses, her mother's Bible, and most importantly, a wooden crate filled with carefully labeled jars of herbs and tinctures she'd learned to prepare during her years away. The knowledge of healing plants had become her trade, her independence, her way of making sense of a world that had shown her its harsh side too young. The first buildings of Dust Rock appeared through the afternoon haze, and Clara's chest tightened. The town looked smaller than memory had painted it, more weathered, like a photograph left too long in the sun. Murphy's General Store still anchored the main street, though its sign hung crooked now. The church steeple still pointed heavenward, though patches of its white paint had peeled away to show gray wood beneath. She had left this place as a girl of 17, slipping away in the pre-dawn darkness 3 days after her father's arrest. The shame had been too fresh then, too raw. Ezra Winslow, caught running moonshine across county lines, had left his daughter with nothing but a tarnished name and neighbors' whispered judgments. Now, at 27, Clara returned not for redemption, but for closure. Her mother's letter, arriving 2 months ago in Billings where Clara had been working with a midwife, had been brief. I am dying. The house is yours. Come, if you will. By the time Clara had arranged her affairs and made the journey, Margaret Winslow was already in the ground behind the church, buried by the charity of the Women's Aid Society. Clara had missed the funeral by a week. The wagon rolled past Sullivan's blacksmith shop, where the ring of hammer on anvil created a rhythm as familiar as her own heartbeat. Old Mr. Sullivan glanced up from his work, his weathered face registering first confusion, then recognition, then something Clara couldn't quite read. He didn't wave. At the Mercantile, Mrs. Henderson emerged to shake out a rug, her movements freezing mid-motion when she spotted Clara. The older woman's mouth opened slightly, then pressed into a thin line. She retreated inside, and Clara could see her speaking urgently to someone beyond the doorway. "So it begins," Clara murmured to herself, keeping her spine straight and her eyes forward. She had known this would happen. Dust Rock had a long memory for scandal, and the Winslow name had been thoroughly dragged through its dusty streets. The boarding house where she'd arranged to stay the first night sat at the edge of town, run by Martha Davies, a widow who'd lost her husband to pneumonia 5 winters back. As Clara pulled the wagon to a stop, Martha emerged onto the porch, her gray hair pinned severely back, her dress black as always, but her smile was warm, genuine. "Clara Winslow," Martha said, descending the steps with surprising agility for her 60 years. "I heard you might be coming back." Mrs. Davies." Clara climbed down from the wagon, her legs stiff from the journey. "Thank you for having a room ready." "Nonsense. Your money's as good as anyone's, and probably better than most." Martha's eyes, sharp as a hawk's, took in Clara's appearance. "You've grown into yourself. I see, no longer that skinny little thing who used to help her mother with the washing." Clara managed a small smile. "That was a long time ago. 10 years ain't so long when you get to my age." Martha glanced at the covered crate in the wagon. "What's all this then?" "My work. I've learned herb craft and healing. Been working with a midwife up in Billings." Martha's eyebrows rose. "A healer now? Well, the Lord knows we could use one. Doc Morrison's getting on in years, and his hands shake something terrible. Come on inside. You can unload after you've had some coffee and cornbread." The boarding house parlor hadn't changed much. Same faded wallpaper with tiny roses. Same horsehair sofa that prickled through fabric. Same daguerreotypes of Martha's late husband staring sternly from the mantel. Clara sat carefully, accepting the china cup Martha pressed into her hands. "Your mother was a good woman," Martha said without preamble. "Whatever sins your father committed, she paid for them tenfold, kept to herself these last years. Rarely came to town except for necessities." "How?" Clara's voice caught. "How did she die?" "Quietly, in her sleep. The neighbor boy found her when she didn't come out to feed the chickens. Doctor said her heart just gave out." Martha studied Clara over her own cup. "She spoke of you sometimes. Said you were making something of yourself out there in the world." Clara stared into her coffee, watching the steam curl upward. "I should have come back sooner." "Should have, could have. Those are words that'll eat you alive if you let them." Martha set down her cup with a decisive clink. "You're here now. What are your plans?" "Settle her affairs, sell the house if anyone will buy it, then move on." "To where?" Clara shrugged. "Wherever there's need of healing hands and no memory of the Winslow scandal." Martha made a dismissive sound. "Running away again." "Making a practical decision." "If you say so." The older woman stood. "Your room's upstairs, second door on the right. Supper's at 6. And Clara." "Yes. This town's changed some since you left. Maybe give it a chance to show you how—" After Martha left, Clara sat alone in the parlor, listening to the familiar sounds of dust rock settling into late afternoon. Somewhere, a dog barked. A child's laughter echoed from a nearby yard. The normal sounds of life continuing, oblivious to her return. She thought of the house waiting for her on the outskirts of town, sitting empty among the cottonwoods. Tomorrow she would have to face it. Walk through rooms where her mother's presence would linger like morning mist. Tonight, though, she could pretend she was just passing through, just another traveler seeking temporary shelter. A commotion outside drew her attention. Through the lace curtains, she saw a group of men gathered in front of the saloon across the street. One of them, taller than the rest, turned in her direction. Even from this distance, even after 10 years, she knew that profile. Clay Harlan. Her heart performed a treacherous skip. He was broader now. His boyish lankiness filled out into a man's solid frame. The badge on his vest caught the slanting sunlight. Some kind of lawman now. Then, he seemed to sense her gaze, his head turning toward the boarding house. But Clara stepped back from the window before their eyes could meet. Not yet. She wasn't ready for that reunion yet. Upstairs, her rented room was small but clean, with a narrow bed and a washstand. A single window overlooking the back garden. Clara unpacked only what she'd need for the night, leaving her herbs and medicines secured in the wagon. She washed the travel dust from her face and hands, unpinned her hair, and tried not to think about how many times she'd imagined this homecoming over the years. She had left as a girl full of shame and grief. She returned as a woman who had learned to heal others' wounds, if not her own. Tomorrow would bring whatever it would bring. Tonight, she would sleep in dust rock again. And even that simple act felt like more courage than she'd mustered in a decade. The morning sun cast long shadows across Dust Rock's main street as Clara made her way to Henderson's Mercantile. She needed supplies for cleaning her mother's house, and though she dreaded the inevitable stares and whispers, the task couldn't be avoided. The store's bell chimed overhead as she entered, the familiar sound triggering a cascade of childhood memories. Mrs. Henderson stood behind the counter, her mouth pursing as if she'd tasted something sour. "Clara Winslow, heard you were back." "Mrs. Henderson." Clara kept her voice neutral. "I need cleaning supplies, lye soap, scrub brushes, and lamp oil." The older woman moved to gather the items with deliberate slowness, as if hoping Clara would grow uncomfortable and leave. Other customers browsed the aisles, their conversations dropping to whispers as they noticed her. Clara recognized the Baxter sisters near the fabric bolts, their heads bent together like conspirators. She was examining a display of canning jars when the bell chimed again. The store fell silent, and Clara didn't need to turn to know who had entered. She felt his presence like a change in barometric pressure before a storm. "Morning, Mrs. Henderson," Clay Harlan's voice rumbled, deeper than she remembered but still carrying that slight drawl. "Need some cartridges for my Winchester." "Of course, Deputy Harlan. Right away." Deputy? So that's what the badge meant. Clara kept her back turned, pretending intense interest in the price of mason jars. She could hear his boots on the wooden floor. Coming closer. Clara. Just her name. Nothing more. She forced herself to turn, to meet his gaze. 10 years had weathered him handsomely. The boy's soft edges had been carved away, leaving sharp cheekbones and a jaw shadowed with stubble. His eyes, though those gray eyes that had once looked at her with such warmth, now held a guarded coolness. "Clay," she nodded, proud that her voice remained steady. "Heard you came in yesterday." His tone was conversational, as if they were strangers making small talk. "Sorry about your mother." "Thank you." An uncomfortable silence stretched between them. Around them. The other customers pretended to shop while hanging on every word. "How long you planning to stay?" Clay asked. "Just long enough to settle things." "I see." Something flickered in his eyes. Disappointment, relief, Clara couldn't tell. "Well, if you need anything while you're here, the sheriff's office is just down the street." The formality of it stung. This was the boy who had taught her to fish in Willow Creek, who had carved their initials in the old oak tree behind the schoolhouse. Now he spoke to her like she was any other visitor passing through. "I'll keep that in mind. Deputy." He flinched slightly at the title but recovered quickly. "Mrs. Henderson, those cartridges." Yes, coming right up." The shopkeeper bustled over with a box of ammunition. "That'll be $2. Deputy." As Clay paid, Clara gathered her supplies and moved to the counter. She could feel him watching her, but when she glanced back, he was studying the ammunition box with apparent fascination. "That'll be $3.15. "Mrs." Henderson announced loudly, as if wanting everyone to know she was conducting business with a Winslow. Clara paid without comment and gathered her purchases. As she turned to leave, she nearly collided with Clay, who hadn't moved from his spot near the counter. "Excuse me," she murmured, stepping around him. "Clara, wait." His hand moved as if to touch her arm, then dropped. The house has been empty a while. Might need some work. I can manage. Thank you." "I didn't mean..." He removed his hat, running a hand through dark hair that still wanted to curl at the edges. "I thought you'd forgotten this place." The words from the dime novel came unbidden to her lips. "I thought you didn't care anymore." His jaw tightened. "That's not..." He glanced around at their rapt audience and lowered his voice. "This isn't the place." "No," Clara agreed. "It isn't." She left him standing there, the bell chiming her exit like a period at the end of a sentence. The walk to her mother's house took her past familiar landmarks, each one a small wound. The schoolhouse where she'd excelled in her studies, before the scandal made her a pariah. The church where she'd sat between her parents every Sunday, back when her father was still respecting the law. The old oak tree, whose bark probably still bore those carved initials, now grown over with time and neglect. The house sat back from the road, sheltered by cottonwoods that had grown taller in her absence. The front gate hung crooked on its hinges, and weeds choked what had once been her mother's prized flower garden. Clara stood for a moment, gathering courage, before pushing through the gate. The key was where the lawyer's letter had said it would be, under the third stone from the porch steps. The door opened with a protesting creak, releasing the musty smell of a house too long closed. Dust motes danced in the sunlight streaming through grimy windows. Everything was as her mother had left it, dishes drying by the sink, a half-finished quilt draped over the rocking chair, spectacles resting on an open Bible. Clara moved through the rooms like a ghost, touching familiar objects that seemed smaller than memory suggested. In her old bedroom, hardly changed, she found herself staring at the window she'd climbed through that last night. She'd left a note on her pillow, 5 lines of explanation that could never have been enough. "Should have said goodbye properly," she murmured to the empty room. She was scrubbing the kitchen floor when she heard horses approaching. Through the window, she saw Clay dismounting, along with another man she didn't recognize, younger, wearing a deputy's badge as well. "Wait here, Tom," Clay instructed the younger man before approaching the house. Clara answered his knock with wet hands and her sleeves rolled up, very aware of the kerchief covering her pinned-up hair and the smudge of dirt she could feel on her cheek. "Deputy," she said coolly. "Is there a problem?" "No, ma'am." He held up a basket covered with a checkered cloth. "Mrs. Davies sent this over. Said you probably hadn't stopped to eat." The gesture, so unexpectedly kind, threatened her composure. That was thoughtful of her. "She also said to tell you that gossiping biddies have nothing better to do than flap their gums, and you shouldn't pay them any mind." Despite herself, Clara felt her lips twitch. "That sounds like Martha?" "Mind if I come in just for a minute?" She hesitated, then stepped aside. Clay removed his hat as he entered, his eyes taking in the evidence of her hard work. "You've been busy." "No point in delay." She accepted the basket, setting it on the freshly scrubbed table. The aroma of fresh bread and what smelled like chicken stew made her stomach rumble, reminding her she'd skipped breakfast. "Clara." Clay turned his hat in his hands, a gesture she remembered from when they were young and he was nervous. "About earlier, at the store, I handled that badly. You were perfectly civil." "That's the problem." He met her eyes then, and for a moment she saw past the deputy to the boy she'd known. "You left without a word, without any explanation beyond that note." "My father had just been arrested. What was I supposed to say? Goodbye. Maybe that you were leaving? That 10 years of friendship meant something." The pain in his voice caught her off guard. "Clay, do you know I rode to every town within 50 miles looking for you? Checked every stage stop, every train station." "I didn't know that." "No, you wouldn't. You were too busy running away." Anger flared hot in her chest. "I was 17 years old. My father was in jail. My family's name was Mud, and people were throwing rocks at our windows. What would you have had me do? Trust me. Talk to me. Let me help." "Help your father" was one of the men who reported mine to the sheriff. Clay went very still. "What? You didn't know?" Clara laughed bitterly. "Judge Harlan was quite vocal about the need to clean up the county's criminal element. My father just happened to be convenient." "My father was doing his job. And my father was trying to feed his family after the drought killed our crops." They stared at each other across years of hurt and misunderstanding. Finally, Clay placed his hat back on his head. "I should go. Tom's waiting." He paused at the door. "Whatever happened between our fathers, Clara, I never stopped." He cut himself off, jaw clenching. "If you need anything while you're here, you know where to find me." After he left, Clara sank into a chair, appetite gone despite the tantalizing smells from Martha's basket. She had thought the hardest part would be facing her mother's empty house. She hadn't prepared for the way seeing Clay would crack open the sealed chambers of her heart, letting in light and pain in equal measure. The whispers followed Clara like dust devils down Main Street. 3 days had passed since her encounter with Clay at her mother's house, and in that time, the town's gossip mill had churned overtime. Every errand became a gauntlet of turned backs and hushed conversations that ceased the moment she approached. "That's her," she heard Prudence Baxter hiss to her sister outside the post office. "Bold as brass, walking around like she belongs here." Clara kept her head high, focusing on the list in her hand. She needed more supplies for the house and had foolishly hoped that morning errands would mean fewer people to encounter. Instead, it seemed half the town had chosen this particular Thursday to conduct their business. At the barber shop, old Samuel Morris was holding court with his usual audience. Ezra Winslow was a smuggler and a no-good drunk, he declared, loud enough to carry across the street. "Apple doesn't fall far from the tree, if you ask me." Clara's step faltered for just a moment. She forced herself to continue toward the hardware store, where she needed new hinges for the garden gate. Behind her, she heard footsteps quickening to match her pace. Miss Winslow Clara. She turned to find Thomas Garrett, Clay's young deputy, jogging toward her. He couldn't have been more than 20, with earnest blue eyes and a nervous habit of adjusting his too-new badge. "Deputy Garrett," she acknowledged warily. "Ma'am." He touched his hat brim. "I wanted to apologize for Mr. Morris back there. He's got no call to speak that way." Clara blinked, surprised by the unexpected kindness. Thank you, but it's not necessary." "Sure it is. My ma always said you can judge a person by how they treat folks who can't fight back." He shifted his weight, looking uncomfortable. "And, well, you being a lady alone and all." "I appreciate the sentiment, deputy, but I assure you I can handle Mr. Morris's opinions." "Yes, ma'am, I just thought—" He was interrupted by a commotion at the blacksmith shop. James Sullivan, the blacksmith's son who had taken over much of his father's work, was arguing with Elijah Pratt, one of the town's less reputable citizens. Clara couldn't make out the words, but Elijah's raised voice and aggressive posture spelled trouble. "Excuse me, ma'am," Thomas muttered, already moving toward the disturbance. Clara watched him go, then turned to find herself face to face with William Grady. The successful rancher and businessman had aged well in the decade since she'd left, his silver hair and expensive clothes marking him as one of Dustrock's most prosperous citizens. He'd also been one of her father's most vocal critics. "Miss Winslow," he said, touching the brim of his costly hat with mock courtesy. "I heard you'd crawled back to town. Mr. Grady." She kept her voice level, though her hands clenched around her shopping list. "Settling your dear mother's affairs. I understand. Such a pity she had to bear the shame alone all these years." His smile was cold as a January morning. "Though I suppose abandoning family is something of a Winslow tradition." Heat flooded Clara's cheeks. "My mother bore herself with dignity, Mr. Grady, which is more than some in this town can claim." "Dignity," he laughed, an ugly sound. "Is that what you call it when a woman has to take in washing to keep food on the table because her husband was a criminal and her daughter a coward?" "That's enough. Grady." Neither of them had noticed Clay approaching until he spoke. He stood with his hand resting casually on his gun belt, but Clara recognized the tension in his shoulders. "Deputy Harlan," Grady sneered. "Come to defend your little sweetheart." "Oh, wait, she ran out on you too, didn't she?" Clay's jaw tightened. "You're disturbing the peace. Mr. Grady, move along." "Disturbing the peace." Grady's voice rose, drawing attention from passers-by. "I'm having a civilized conversation with Miss Winslow about her family's contribution to this town's history." "A one-sided conversation that's over now," Clay said firmly. "Unless you'd like to continue it in my office." For a moment, the two men stared at each other. Then Grady laughed again. That same unpleasant sound. "No need for that. Deputy, I've said my piece." He tipped his hat to Clara again, the gesture somehow more insulting than a slight would have been. "Good day, Miss Winslow. Do give my regards to your father when you see him." "Oh, wait, he's still in territorial prison, isn't he?" He strolled away, leaving Clara standing rigid with humiliation and rage. She was dimly aware of other townspeople watching, of whispered speculations about what had just transpired. "Clara," Clay said quietly, "are you all right?" She couldn't look at him, couldn't bear to see pity in those gray eyes. "I don't need you to fight my battles." "I wasn't—" "Yes, you were." She finally met his gaze, saw not pity but anger directed at Grady, not her. And now everyone will have even more to gossip about. The fallen woman and her faithful defender. I don't give a damn what they gossip about. Well, I do. The words came out sharper than intended. I have to live with it. Clay, every whisper, every turned back, every cruel word that's my daily bread here. You defending me just confirms what they all think anyway. And what's that? That I came back for you. That I'm trying to trap you somehow. Use our old friendship to... She broke off, shaking her head. It doesn't matter. Excuse me, I have errands to finish. She turned away, but his voice stopped her. He was wrong, you know, about your mother. Clara paused, but didn't turn back. She never took in washing. She made her living selling herbs and remedies, just like you do now. Doc Morrison bought from her regular. Said she had a gift for it. She taught Sunday school, too, right up until last winter. The unexpected tears burned Clara's eyes. She blinked them back furiously. The town respected her. Clara, maybe not all of them, maybe not openly, but she carved out a place for herself. She survived. Without me, Clara whispered. That was your choice. The words hung between them like a challenge. Clara squared her shoulders and walked away without responding, leaving Clay standing in the street. At the hardware store, Mr. Potter served her with stiff politeness, finding the hinges she needed without comment. She was examining a selection of paintbrushes when she heard feminine voices near the entrance. Absolutely shameless, standing there in the street with him like that. Well, what do you expect? She always did chase after the Harlan boy. Poor Clay. So handsome. So dedicated to his work. He deserves better than some runaway who thinks she can waltz back and pick up where she left off. Clara recognized the voices, Mrs. Abernathy and Mrs. Dalton, the town's most enthusiastic gossips. She stayed behind the display of tools, hoping they would leave without noticing her. Mark my words, Mrs. Abernathy continued. She's here to cause trouble. Why else would she come back after all this time? Maybe she heard Clay wasn't married yet? Probably thought she could sink her hooks into him before some decent girl had the chance. Clara's hands clenched around the paintbrush she held. She forced herself to breathe slowly, to wait them out. But Mrs. Dalton wasn't finished. I heard she learned doctoring of some kind, probably picked up all sorts of unseemly knowledge out there in the world. No decent woman would... Ladies? Martha Davies's voice cut through their gossip like a blade. Clara peered around the display to see the boarding house owner standing with her arms crossed, fixing both women with a steely glare. Mrs. Davies, Mrs. Abernathy said weakly. We were just... I heard what you were doing, flapping your gums about things that ain't none of your business. Martha's voice carried the authority of age and righteous indignation. That girl's mother just died. She's here to settle affairs and grieve. If you two biddies had an ounce of Christian charity in your souls, you'd be offering condolences instead of spreading poison. Mrs. Dalton had the grace to look ashamed, but Mrs. Abernathy bristled. Well, I never... No, you never do think before you speak. Constance Abernathy. Now get on out of here before I tell everyone about that time you... We were just leaving. Mrs. Dalton interrupted hastily, dragging her companion toward the door. After they fled, Martha turned and looked directly at Clara's hiding spot. You can come out now, child. Clara emerged, feeling foolish. Thank you, Martha. Don't thank me. I can't stand hypocrites. The older woman studied her shrewdly. Though hiding behind displays won't solve your problems. I wasn't hiding. I was avoiding confrontation. Martha snorted. Same thing, dressed up prettier. You planning to avoid confrontation your whole life? Just until I can leave town again. Martha picked up a handful of nails, examining them as if they held great significance. Your mother never hid, faced down every whisper, every slight, with her head high. Takes a different kind of courage to stay and fight than to run away. I didn't run away. I left to build a life." "You ran," Martha said bluntly. "Question is, you gonna keep running, or you gonna plant your feet and show these folks who Clara Winslow really is?" Before Clara could answer, Martha had purchased her nails and swept out of the store, leaving Clara standing among the paintbrushes and hinges, wondering if the older woman might be right. The moon hung like a silver dollar in the clear night sky as Clara sat on her mother's porch, wrapped in a worn quilt that still smelled faintly of lavender. She'd spent the entire day cleaning and organizing, trying to decide what to keep and what to sell. Every drawer held memories. Every cupboard contained ghosts. The sound of approaching hoofbeats made her tense. It was past 9 o'clock, too late for social calls. She reached for the shotgun she'd found in her father's old study, checking that it was loaded before stepping into the shadows beside the door. The rider dismounted at the gate, his silhouette familiar even in the darkness. Clara lowered the gun with a mixture of relief and irritation. "That's a good way to get yourself shot. Clay Harlan," she called out. He paused, hands raised slightly. "Wasn't sure you'd talk to me if you saw me coming in daylight." "What makes you think I'll talk to you now?" "Because you haven't gone inside yet." He approached slowly, stopping at the bottom of the porch steps. In the moonlight, she could see the uncertainty in his face. "May I come up?" Clara hesitated, then nodded. She returned to her seat, leaving space on the worn wooden bench. Clay settled beside her, careful to maintain proper distance. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked. "Something like that." He removed his hat, turning it in his hands. "Kept thinking about what Grady said today, about what you said." "Which part?" "All of it, I suppose." He was quiet for a moment, studying the star-dusted sky. "I was wrong this afternoon. Not about defending you, I'd do that again in a heartbeat. But you were right that I made things harder for you." Clara pulled the quilt tighter around her shoulders. "It doesn't matter." "Sure it does." He shifted to face her. "Clara, I need to tell you something. About when you left." "Clay." "Just let me say this, please." When she nodded, he continued. "That morning, when I heard about your father's arrest, I saddled up to come see you, but my father stopped me, said the Winslows had brought shame on the town and I was to stay clear. We argued something fierce." Clara watched his profile, saw the old pain etched there. "By the time I got away, you were gone. Your mother wouldn't tell me where, said it was better that way." He laughed bitterly. "I was so angry. At you for leaving. At her for not telling me. At my father for, well, for being who he was." "Clay, I didn't know." "Course you didn't. How could you? I never got the chance to tell you." He stood abruptly, pacing to the porch rail. "I need you to know something else. My father, he was one of the men who turned yours in. You were right about that." Clara's breath caught. "You knew?" "Not then. Found out about a year later. Overheard him talking with Judge Patterson. They were discussing how they'd cleaned up the county, run out the undesirable elements." His knuckles whitened as he gripped the rail. "I confronted him about it. He said your father was a criminal and got what he deserved. Said I should be grateful he'd saved me from making a mistake with you." "Oh, Clay." "We didn't speak for near 6 months after that, when he died 3 years ago. We'd made our peace. Mostly, but things were never the same." He turned back to her. "I should have told you in that note I sent, but I couldn't find the words. Still can't, really." "What note?" He frowned. "The one I gave your mother to send? About a month after you left. Told you about my father's involvement. Said I was sorry. Asked where I could find you." Clara shook her head slowly. "I never got any note." They stared at each other as understanding dawned. "She never sent it," Clay said quietly. "She must have thought she was protecting me." Clara's voice was barely a whisper. "Or you, or both of us." 10 years. Clay sank back onto the bench. 10 years of thinking you got my letter and chose not to respond. 10 years of thinking you'd chosen your family's reputation over our friendship. The silence stretched between them, heavy with the weight of lost time and misunderstandings. Somewhere in the cottonwoods, an owl hooted mournfully. "I should go," Clay said finally, though he made no move to stand. "It's late, and you shouldn't have male visitors after dark. People will talk. People already talk." "That's why I should go." This time, he did stand, settling his hat back on his head. "But Clara, I want you to know something. What I said at the store about thinking you'd forgotten this place, that wasn't fair. You had every right to leave, to make a life somewhere you weren't judged by your father's mistakes." Clara stood too, the quilt falling from her shoulders. "But I did forget, Clay, or tried to forget all of it, this town, the people, you. It hurt too much to remember. And now? Now I'm here, and the hurt's still here too, and I don't know what to do with any of it." She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold. "I keep thinking I should just sell quickly and leave. It would be easier." "Easier for who?" She looked up at him. "For everyone." "Not for me." The words came out rough, barely audible. He cleared his throat. "I mean, the town needs healing folk. Doc Morrison's getting on, like Martha said." "Clay." I know you've got no reason to stay. Just think about it, all right?" He descended the steps, paused at the bottom. "If you send me away right now, I'll respect that. But if you'll let me, I'd like to try being your friend again. No expectations, no pressure, just friendship, like before." Clara thought of all the reasons she should say no. The gossip, the complications, the pain of proximity to something that could never be recaptured. But she also thought of 10 years of silence, of misunderstandings that had stolen time they could never get back. "All right," she heard herself say. "Friends." His smile was visible even in the darkness. "Thank you. Good night, Clara." "Good night, Clay." She watched him ride away, then noticed something on the step where he'd been standing. Bending down, she found a small wrapped package. Inside was a packet of her mother's favorite tea chamomile and mint, the kind she used to brew when Clara couldn't sleep. The gesture, so thoughtful and unexpected, brought tears to her eyes. She stood there on the porch, clutching the tea, wondering if coming home might mean more than just settling her mother's affairs after all. The next morning brought clouds and the promise of rain. Clara was at the kitchen table, sorting through her mother's correspondence, when she heard a commotion outside. Through the window, she saw a rider approaching at full gallop young Thomas Garrett, his face flushed with urgency. "Miss Clara," he called, not bothering to dismount properly. "Are you the healer lady? The one who knows about medicines?" "I have some knowledge," she said cautiously, stepping onto the porch. "What's wrong?" "It's the widow Patterson's grandson, little Jake. He's burning up with fever, can barely breathe. Doc Morrison's gone to Canyon Creek for a birth. Won't be back till tomorrow at least. Mrs. Davies said you could help." Clara didn't hesitate. "Wait here, I need my supplies." She gathered her medicine case quickly, checking her stores of willow bark, echinacea, and other fever-reducing herbs. As she climbed up behind Thomas on his horse, she tried not to think about how this would fuel more gossip. The Winslow girl, riding through town with a man, bold as you please. The Patterson house was in chaos when they arrived. Women clustered in the parlor, speaking in hushed tones, while from upstairs came the sound of a child's labored breathing. Clara took the stairs 2 at a time, finding 6-year-old Jake Patterson pale and struggling in his bed, his grandmother beside herself with worry. "When did this start?" Clara asked, already checking the boy's pulse and temperature. "Yesterday evening, Mrs. Patterson replied. Just a little cough at first, but then the fever came on so fast. I need hot water, clean cloths, and someone to open all these windows. The room's too stuffy." Clara began pulling items from her case. "Thomas, ride to my house. In the wagon. There's a blue jar labeled elderflower. Bring it quickly." For the next several hours, Clara worked tirelessly. She prepared poultices for the child's chest, brewed teas to reduce fever, and showed Mrs. Patterson how to help Jake breathe easier, slowly, gradually. The boy's color improved and his breathing eased. It wasn't until late afternoon that Clara realized she'd acquired an audience. Women who'd been whispering in the parlor now watched from the doorway as she worked, their expressions shifting from suspicion to grudging respect. "Is he going to be all right, Mrs.?" Patterson asked, touching Clara's arm with trembling fingers. "The fever's broken. He'll need careful watching for the next day or two. But yes, I believe he'll recover fully." Clara began packing her supplies. "I'll leave you with instructions and come check on him tomorrow." "Thank you. Oh, thank you." The older woman's eyes filled with tears. "When Doc Morrison's away, we never know what to do. If you hadn't come, anyone would have done the same." "No," said a voice from the doorway. "Mrs." Abernathy stood there, the same woman who'd been gossiping about Clara just yesterday. "No, they wouldn't have. I owe you an apology, Miss Winslow." Clara was too exhausted to be gracious. "You owe me nothing, Mrs. Abernathy. I helped because it was needed, not to earn anyone's good opinion." As she made her way downstairs, she found Clay waiting in the parlor, hat in hand. "Heard there was some excitement," he said. "Thomas said you rode off with him like the house was on fire. Jake Patterson was very ill. And now—" "Better. He'll recover." Clay's smile was warm with something that looked like pride. "That's good work, Clara, real good work." "It's what I do." She swayed slightly, fatigue hitting her all at once. Clay's hands shot out to steady her. "When's the last time you ate?" "This morning, I think." "Come on, Martha's got supper waiting, and she'll skin me alive if I don't get you there in one piece." As they walked through town together, Clara noticed the looks were different this time. Still curious, yes, but mixed with something new, a grudging acceptance, perhaps, or at least the beginning of it. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for sending Thomas to me." "I didn't send him. That was all Martha's doing, though I'd have done the same if I'd known." He glanced at her. "You did good today. Clara, your mother would have been proud." The words warmed her more than she cared to admit. As they reached the boarding house, with Martha fussing over her like a mother hen and the smell of beef stew making her stomach growl, Clara allowed herself to think that maybe, just maybe, staying in Dust Rock wouldn't be the mistake she'd feared. But on the boarding house steps, she turned to Clay with a sudden thought. "You said if I sent you away, you'd respect it. That offer still stand." His face went carefully neutral. "If that's what you want." "I don't know what I want, but if we're going to be friends, just friends, then I need you to promise something." "What's that?" "Don't defend me anymore. Don't fight my battles or stand up for me in public. Let me earn my place here on my own terms." Clay was quiet for a long moment, clearly struggling with the request. "Finally." He nodded. "All right, but if Grady or anyone else goes too far, then I'll handle it myself." She managed a small smile. "I'm not 17 anymore. Clay, I don't need a knight in shining armor." "No," he agreed, his gray eyes serious. "I don't reckon you do." As Clara went inside to Martha's fussing and hot food, she didn't see Clay remain on the steps, looking up at the emerging stars. She didn't hear him murmur, "If you say no, I'll sleep outside, but don't expect me to forget you." Some promises, after all, were made to be kept in silence. The rain that had threatened the previous day arrived in earnest, turning Dust Rock's streets into rivers of mud. Clara stood at her mother's kitchen window, watching droplets race down the glass like tears. She'd been in town a week now, and the house was finally clean, organized, ready to sell. Yet she found herself reluctant to take that final step. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. She found Thomas Garrett on the porch, water streaming from his hat brim. "Morning, Miss Clara. Sorry to bother you, but Mrs. Olson's baby's got the croup something fierce. She's asking if you could come." Clara was already reaching for her medical case. "Of course. Let me get my cloak." The Olson farm sat 3 miles outside town, a modest spread where Henrik Olson struggled to make wheat grow in soil better suited to cattle. Clara had delivered their youngest just 8 months ago in Billings, a coincidence that had brought tears to Sarah Olson's eyes when she'd heard Clara was back. The baby's barking cough could be heard from the yard. Inside, Clara found chaos, 3 older children underfoot. Sarah pale with worry, Henrik pacing like a caged bear. "Thank God you're here," Sarah breathed. "He started coughing last night, and it just keeps getting worse." Clara examined the infant quickly, noting the telltale sound of his breathing. "I need a tent made of blankets over his cradle, and pots of steaming water underneath. The moist air will help." For the next several hours, she worked to ease the baby's breathing, showing Sarah how to hold him upright, preparing herbal steam treatments. By midday, the frightening bark had softened to occasional coughs. "You're a miracle worker," Henrik declared, his Swedish accent thickening with emotion. "What do we owe you?" "Nothing," Clara said, packing her supplies. "Your friendship is payment enough." No, we must—" He stopped, eyes lighting up. "Eggs, Sarah. Get Miss Clara some eggs. And that cheese we made yesterday." Despite her protests, Clara left with a basket of fresh eggs, cheese, and a loaf of Sarah's renowned sourdough bread. The rain had stopped, leaving the world washed clean and sparkling. She was halfway back to town when she met Clay riding out, leading a spare horse. "Figured you might need a ride back," he said, offering no explanation for how he'd known where she'd gone. "Thomas has a mouth bigger than Texas." But Clay was smiling. "Come on, that basket looks heavy." She allowed him to help her mount, trying to ignore the way her pulse jumped when his hands circled her waist. They rode in comfortable silence until town came into view. "There's something I should tell you," Clay said suddenly. "The spring festival's coming up in 2 weeks." I remember. The annual celebration marking planting season had always been a highlight of Dustrock's social calendar. "People are expecting you to come." Clara snorted. "People are expecting me to provide entertainment by showing up where I'm not wanted." "That's not—" Clay stopped himself, clearly remembering his promise not to defend her. "What I mean is, Doc Morrison usually sets up a booth for medical complaints. Minor things, cuts, bruises, stomach ailments from too much pie. Since he'll be away again, folks were hoping you might take his place." Folks or Martha. Martha might have mentioned it, and Mrs. Patterson, and Sarah Olson, and about 6 others who've seen what you can do. He glanced at her. "It'd be a chance to show the town who you really are." Clara considered this. The festival would indeed draw everyone from miles around. It could either cement her reputation as a capable healer or provide more ammunition for those determined to see her as an outsider. "I'll think about it," she said finally. They parted at the boarding house, where Martha was waiting with knowing eyes and a cup of tea. "Saw you riding through town with the deputy," the older woman said without preamble. "He was just helping me back from the Olson place." Martha's tone suggested she wasn't buying it. "That boy's been just helping quite a bit lately." "We're friends, or trying to be." "Friends." Martha tasted the word like she was testing soup for seasoning. "That what you're calling it?" "That's what it is." Clara accepted the tea gratefully. "What it has to be." Martha studied her shrewdly. "Because you're leaving or because you're scared?" "I'm not scared." "Child, you're terrified. Question is, what of the gossip that's dying down already, especially after what you did for the Patterson boy?" Clay himself, that boy would walk through fire for you. That's exactly the problem, Clara interrupted. I don't want anyone walking through fire for me. I don't want to be the girl who came back and trapped the deputy into what, loving you, honey? That horse left the barn 10 years ago and never came back. Clara's cup rattled against the saucer as she set it down. You don't know that. I've got eyes. Haven't I? That boy looks at you like you hung the moon and stars. Martha leaned forward. But here's the thing. You look at him the same way when you think nobody's watching. It doesn't matter how I look at him. In another week, maybe 2, I'll be gone. Will you? Because from where I sit, you're finding more reasons to stay every day. Before Clara could respond, Thomas burst through the door, eyes wild. Miss Clara, there's been an accident at the mill. Wagon overturned Mr. Jameson's pinned underneath, and his boy Samuel's hurt bad. Clara was moving before he finished speaking, medical case in hand. How bad? Can't tell. There's blood, and his arm's bent wrong. The scene at the mill was controlled chaos. Men worked to lift the wagon while others had laid Samuel Jameson, all of 14 years old, on a blanket nearby. His left arm was clearly broken, and a gash on his forehead bled freely. Step back. Give her room, someone commanded Reverend Mills. She realized with surprise. The stern minister, who'd barely acknowledged her presence since her return, now cleared a path for her without hesitation. Clara knelt beside the boy, checking his pupils, his breathing. Samuel, can you hear me? Yes, ma'am, he whimpered. It hurt something awful. I know, sweetheart. I'm going to help. She looked up at the gathered men. I need straight boards for splints and clean water. Someone should check on Mr. Jameson. Already did. Clay appeared at her elbow. He's bruised, but nothing's broken. More scared than hurt. Clara nodded, focusing on Samuel. She cleaned the head wound first superficial, thankfully, then turned her attention to the arm. This is going to hurt, she warned. Clay, hold him steady. Setting the bone was never pleasant, but she worked quickly and efficiently. Samuel cried out once, then bit his lip, trying to be brave. Within minutes, she had the arm splinted and wrapped. You did well, she told the boy. Very brave. Keep it still and come see me tomorrow so I can check its healing properly. Yes, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. As Samuel was helped to his feet, his father limped over, supported by 2 mill workers. Miss Winslow, we can't thank you enough. No thanks necessary. Mr. Jameson, just make sure Samuel rests that arm. We will. And Miss Winslow, I'm sorry. Clara frowned. For what? For believing the talk. For not giving you a chance. He met her eyes squarely. Your mother was a good woman, and it seems the apple didn't fall far from the tree after all. The crowd began to disperse, but Clara noticed more than one person stopped to nod at her respectfully. Reverend Mills paused beside her. That was good work, Miss Winslow. Perhaps you'd consider teaching some of our ladies basic medical care for times when Doc Morrison's away. Clara blinked, stunned. Yes, of course. I'd be happy to. Excellent. We'll discuss it after church on Sunday. He tipped his hat and walked away, leaving Clara wondering if she'd somehow stepped into an alternate version of Dustrock. Look at you, Clay said softly, a grin playing at his lips, making converts left and right. I'm just doing what needs doing. That's exactly why it's working. He glanced around, then leaned closer. For what it's worth, I'm proud of you. Clay? I know. No defending, no public displays. But I can be proud in private. Can't I? She found herself smiling despite everything. I suppose that's allowed. That evening, as Clara organized her medical supplies back at her mother's house, she heard a wagon approaching. Through the window, she saw several townspeople unloading lumber and paint cans. What's all this? She asked, stepping onto the porch. Henrik Olsen tipped his hat. Heard you might be staying a while. Figured the old shed out back could make a fine clinic with some fixing up. I haven't decided. No pressure, said Mr. Patterson, hefting a toolbox. But if you do stay, you'll need a proper place to see patients. Can't have folks traipsing through your house at all hours. Clara stood speechless as the men set to work, measuring and planning. Martha appeared with a basket of food for the workers, winking at Clara as she passed. I told you, she murmured. More reasons every day. As the sound of hammers and saws filled the evening air, Clara retreated inside, overwhelmed. On her mother's desk, she found the letter she'd started to the land agent about selling the house. Slowly, deliberately, she tore it in half. She wasn't ready to make any permanent decisions, but maybe, just maybe, she could stop planning her escape long enough to see what might grow if she planted herself here, just for a season. Through the window, she caught sight of Clay helping with the construction, his shirt sleeves rolled up, laughing at something Henrik said, as if sensing her gaze. He looked up and their eyes met. He smiled, touched his hat brim, and returned to work. Clara pressed her hand to her traitorous heart, which insisted on racing whenever he was near. Friends, she reminded herself firmly. Just friends. But as the evening progressed and the skeleton of a clinic took shape in her backyard, built by hands that had once shunned her family, Clara allowed herself to imagine what it might be like to stay, to heal not just bodies, but old wounds, to build something new from the ashes of the past. The spring festival was still 2 weeks away. 2 weeks to decide if she could risk her heart in a place that had already broken it once. 2 weeks to discover if coming home might actually mean finding where she belonged. The morning of the spring festival dawned clear and bright, with a breeze that carried the scent of apple blossoms from the garret orchard. Clara stood before her mother's old mirror, holding up 2 dresses, her practical brown wool, and a blue cotton she'd impulsively purchased from Mrs. Henderson the day before. Vanity, Clara Winslow, she muttered to herself, but reached for the blue one anyway. A knock at the door interrupted her preparations. Martha Davies stood on the porch, carrying a basket covered with checkered cloth. Figured you might be too nervous to eat breakfast, the older woman said, bustling inside without invitation. Can't have you fainting at your booth. I'm not nervous, Clara protested, even as her hands trembled slightly while pinning up her hair. Course not. That's why you've been pacing since dawn. Saw your lamp burning at 4 this morning. Martha began unpacking fresh biscuits and jam. Eat something, child. It's going to be a long day. Clara obediently took a biscuit, though her stomach churned with anxiety. What if no one comes to the medical booth? What if they'd rather wait for Doc Morrison? Then they're fools, and that's their loss. Martha studied her critically. You need help with that hair. 20 minutes later, Clara's dark hair was swept up in an elegant twist that made her neck look longer, more graceful. Martha had even produced a blue ribbon that matched the dress perfectly. There, the older woman said with satisfaction. Now you look like the professional healer you are. Martha, why are you being so kind to me? Someone needs to be. Besides, Martha's eyes softened. Your mother was kind to me when my Robert passed. Sat with me through those long nights. Brought me tea and didn't make me talk when I couldn't find words. I don't forget such things. The festival grounds were already bustling when Clara arrived with her medical supplies. Colorful booths lined the main square, selling everything from penny candy to farm tools. Children raced between the stalls while their mothers gossiped and fathers discussed crop prices. Clay appeared as she was setting up her booth, carrying lumber and a hand-painted sign that read, Medical Care, C. Winslow, Herbalist. Thought you might need this, he said, not quite meeting her eyes. He wore his good shirt. Clara noticed, the dark blue one that made his eyes look like storm clouds. Thank you, it's perfect. I'll check on you later. Gotta help judge the pie contest first. He grimaced. Hazards of being a deputy. The terrible sacrifices you make for law and order, Clara said dryly, surprised when he laughed. Exactly. If I die of too much rhubarb pie, tell them I went bravely. After he left, Clara busied herself arranging supplies, trying not to think about how his laugh still made her pulse skip. The first hour passed slowly, with people walking by her booth but not stopping, their glances curious but wary. Then Agnes Morrison, the doctor's own wife, approached with her grandson. "Little Pete's got a splinter deep in his palm," she announced loudly enough for others to hear. "Won't let his grandpa near it with tweezers, but I told him Miss Clara has gentler hands." Clara carefully extracted the splinter while Pete watched with wide eyes. "There now. Brave boy. All done." "That didn't hurt at all," Pete exclaimed, examining his hand with wonder. "Miss Clara knows what she's doing," Agnes said, still in that carrying voice. "Trained with the best healers in Montana, from what I hear." After that, the dam broke. A steady stream of people approached with minor complaints, cuts, bruises, stomach upsets from too many festival treats. Clara treated each with professional calm, and gradually, the suspicious looks gave way to grateful smiles. She was bandaging a scraped knee when she heard a commotion near the dance platform. William Grady stood there, his voice carrying over the fiddle music. "I see we're letting anyone set up shop these days," he said to no one in particular. "What's next? Horse thieves running the bank." Clara's hand stilled on the bandage. Around her, conversations quieted as people waited to see what would happen. "That's enough. Grady." Reverend Mills stepped forward. "This is a day of celebration." Celebration with the daughter of a criminal pretending to be respectable. Grady's eyes found Clara across the square. "Her father brought shame to this town. Why should we trust her with our health?" Clara stood slowly, her legs unsteady. She'd known this was coming, had prepared for it, but the public humiliation still stung. She started to speak, but another voice cut through the tension. "Because she saved my grandson's life." "Mrs." Patterson moved through the crowd like a ship under full sail. "When he was burning with fever and Doc Morrison was away," she came without hesitation. "And my baby," Sarah Olson added, stepping forward with her infant in her arms. "He might have died of croup if not for Miss Clara." "She set my boy's broken arm," called out Mr. Jameson, quick and clean as any doctor. One by one, people began speaking up, those she'd helped, those who'd witnessed her work. Even Mrs. Abernathy, who'd gossiped so viciously just weeks ago, stood with the others. Ezra Winslow made his choices and paid for them, Agnes Morrison said firmly. But this young woman has shown nothing but kindness and skill since returning. I'd trust her with my family any day. Grady's face reddened. "You've all lost your minds. She's wool pulled over your eyes. Mark my words." "The only thing I'm marking," Martha Davies interrupted, "is that you're disrupting a peaceful festival. Sheriff Thompson, perhaps Mr. Grady needs to cool off somewhere quiet." The sheriff, who'd been watching from nearby, stepped forward. "Might be best if you headed home. William, sleep off whatever's got you so riled." Grady sputtered, but with the crowd clearly against him and the sheriff involved, he had no choice but to retreat. As he stormed off, Clara found herself surrounded by townspeople offering support and encouragement. "Thank you," she managed, overwhelmed. "All of you." "No need for thanks," Agnes said briskly. "Just keep doing what you're doing." The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur. Clara's booth stayed busy, and she found herself relaxing into easy conversation with people who'd once crossed streets to avoid her. When the dinner break came, she was exhausted, but oddly exhilarated. She was packing supplies when a shadow fell across her booth. Looking up, she found Judge Harlan Clay's father's brother, now retired but still formidable. "Miss Winslow," he said formally. Clara straightened, bracing herself. Judge Harlan, I owe you an apology. The words seemed to cost him. My brother was overzealous in his pursuit of justice. Your father broke the law, yes, but perhaps mercy might have served better than harsh judgment. Clara stared at him, speechless. I'm not saying your father was innocent. The judge continued. But I've had years to think about it, and I believe we could have handled things differently. Your mother suffered for our rigidity, and that wasn't right. I thank you for saying so. He nodded stiffly. Clay's a good man, better than his father in many ways. Don't punish him for our mistakes. Before Clara could respond, he walked away, leaving her to puzzle over his meaning. As evening approached, lanterns were lit around the dance platform. The fiddle players struck up a lively tune, and couples began forming for the traditional festival dance. Clara watched from her booth, content to observe, when Clay appeared at her elbow. You planning to hide here all night? I'm not hiding, I'm organizing. Uh-huh. He held out his hand. Dance with me, Clara. Clay, I don't think... Just one dance, for old time's sake. She looked at his outstretched hand, then at the crowded dance floor where they'd be on full display. It would fuel gossip for weeks, but after everything that had happened today, she found she didn't care. All right, she said, placing her hand in his. One dance. He led her onto the platform just as the musicians began a slower waltz. Clara had forgotten how well they fit together, how naturally her hand settled on his shoulder, how easily they found their rhythm. You did good today, Clay said softly, standing up to Grady like that. I didn't stand up to him. Everyone else did. Because you earned their respect, that took courage. They turned in slow circles, and Clara became aware of people watching them, but instead of hostile stares, she saw mostly smiles, nods of approval, even misses. Henderson looked pleased. Your uncle spoke to me earlier. Clara said, apologized for how things were handled with my father. Clay missed a step. He did. Said I shouldn't punish you for their mistakes. What did he mean by that? Clay was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Finally, he said, maybe he could see what I've been trying to hide. Which is, he looked down at her, his gray eyes serious, that I never stopped caring about you, Clara, not for one day in 10 years. Clara's breath caught. Clay! I know we said just friends, and I'll honor that if it's what you want. But you should know the truth. The music ended, but they stood frozen for a moment longer. Then Clara stepped back, her cheeks burning. I need some air, she said, not waiting for his response before fleeing the platform. She found herself at the edge of the festival grounds, near the old oak where Clay had carved their initials so many years ago. Her fingers traced the weathered letters, barely visible now. Running away again? She turned to find Clay behind her, hands in his pockets. It's what I do best, apparently. That's not true. He moved closer. You've faced down this whole town, won them over with nothing but skill and kindness. That's not running, that's fighting. But I don't know how to face this. She gestured between them. Us. I don't know how to trust it. Then don't, not yet. He reached out, tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. Just stay. Give it time. Give us time. And if it doesn't work, if the town turns on me again, if we can't get past what happened, then at least we'll know we tried. His hand cupped her cheek gently. But Clara, what if it does work? What if this is exactly where you're supposed to be? She leaned into his touch for just a moment before stepping away. I need to think. I know, I'm not going anywhere. He smiled softly. Well, except back to the pie contest. Duty calls? As he walked away, Clara touched the carved initials one more time. The festival music drifted on the evening breeze, mixing with laughter and the comfortable sounds of a community at play. Her community. She realized with surprise. somewhere between treating scraped knees and dancing in Clay's arms. Dustrock had started to feel like home again. The decision to stay or go still loomed, but tonight, with lantern light painting golden circles on the ground and the shadow of the past finally beginning to lift, Clara allowed herself to hope that maybe, just maybe, she could build a future here after all. The week following the festival passed in a blur of patience and possibilities. Clara's makeshift clinic in the converted shed saw a steady stream of visitors, and she found herself settling into a routine that felt both foreign and familiar. She was organizing her herb supplies when she heard raised voices from the street. Through the window, she saw Clay facing down William Grady and two other men she didn't recognize. Grady's face was red with anger, his finger jabbing the air as he spoke. Letting that woman practice her witch medicine on decent folks? What kind of lawman are you, Harlan? Clay's stance was relaxed, but Clara knew him well enough to see the tension in his shoulders. Miss Winslow is providing a needed service. Grady, unless she's breaking the law, it's none of my concern. None of your concern. She's got half the town under her spell, just like her mother did with those potions and remedies. For all we know, she's poisoning people. That's a serious accusation. Clay's voice had gone dangerously quiet. You have proof. I don't need proof. Everyone knows. What everyone knows, a new voice interrupted, is that you're making a fool of yourself. William. Reverend Mills had appeared, flanked by several members of the church board. The Reverend's usually mild demeanor had hardened into something more formidable. Reverend, Grady sputtered. Surely you can't approve of this situation? What I approve of is Christian charity and helping those in need. Miss Winslow has shown both in abundance. The Reverend's gaze was steady. What have you shown, William, besides spite and vindictiveness? You'll regret this. Grady snarled. All of you, when she shows her true colors. The only one showing their true colors here is you, Clay said evenly. Now move along before I find a reason to arrest you for disturbing the peace. Grady stormed off with his companions, but not before shooting a venomous look toward Clara's house. She stepped back from the window, her hands shaking slightly. A few minutes later, a soft knock came at her door. Clay stood there, hat in hand. You all right? Saw you at the window. I'm fine. She opened the door wider, gesturing him in. Though I'm starting to wonder if Grady will ever let this go. Probably not. Men like him feed on grudges. Clay looked around the organized clinic space, taking in the neatly labeled jars and clean surfaces. You've done something nice here. The town helped build it. You inspired them to. He turned back to her, his expression serious. Clara, there's something you should know. Grady's been talking to some folks, trying to stir up trouble. Most aren't listening, but some are. He nodded. I wanted you to be prepared, and to know I'm keeping an eye on things. Clay, you promised not to fight my battles. I'm not fighting them. I'm just watching. There's a difference. He managed a small smile. Besides, looked like Reverend Mills had it well in hand today. Before Clara could respond, young Thomas Garrett burst through the door. Miss Clara, come quick. There's been an accident at the mine cave-in. Multiple injuries. Clara was already grabbing her medical bag. How many hurt? At least 6, ma'am. Doc Morrison's on his way, but he sent me to fetch you too. Clay, I'll need transportation for supplies and possibly injured men. I'll get wagons organized. Thomas, ride ahead and tell them we're coming. The scene at the mine was chaos. Dust still hung in the air from the collapse, and men were frantically working to clear debris. Doc Morrison was already there, his aged hands surprisingly steady as he examined the first victim pulled from the rubble. Clara, thank God, he said without looking up. Take the walking wounded cuts, bruises, possible concussions. Send me anything more serious. Clara set up a triage area with efficient speed. For the next several hours, she cleaned wounds, set a dislocated shoulder, and monitored 3 men for signs of serious head injury. She was so focused she didn't notice the crowd gathering until she heard someone say, "Look at her go, cool as Winter Creek water." The rescue efforts continued past sunset. Lanterns were brought, casting eerie shadows as exhausted miners continued to dig. When the last man was pulled free injured but alive, a cheer went up from the assembled crowd. Clara was bandaging the final patient when Doc Morrison approached, looking every one of his 70 years. "Fine work today," he said, sinking onto a nearby crate. "Couldn't have managed without you." "You would have done just fine." Clara protested. "No, I wouldn't have." He fixed her with a steady gaze. "These old hands aren't what they used to be, and we both know it. I've been thinking about retiring, moving to Denver to be near my daughter. Been putting it off because the town needs a healer." Clara's breath caught. "Dr. Morrison. Now it seems the town has one. A damn fine one." He patted her shoulder. "Think about it, Clara. This town needs you. More than that, you belong here." As the doctor walked away, Clara stood frozen. Around her, miners and townspeople were shaking hands, sharing water, comforting each other. She saw Mrs. Patterson organizing food for the workers, the Olsons distributing blankets, Sheriff Thompson coordinating the cleanup efforts, a community pulling together in crisis, the way communities were supposed to. "You did good tonight." Clay appeared beside her, coal dust smudging his face. "We all did good." "Maybe, but you kept your head when others might have panicked. You saved lives tonight. Clara." She looked up at him, seeing past the dust to the pride in his eyes. "I just did what needed doing." "Story of your life lately." He reached out, brushed a strand of hair from her face with gentle fingers. "You've got coal dust in your hair." "So do you." They stood there for a moment, oblivious to the activity around them. Then someone called Clay's name, breaking the spell. "I should help with the cleanup," he said, "and I should check on my patients once more." But neither moved immediately. "Finally," Clay said, "Clara, about what Doc Morrison said." "Not now," she interrupted. It's too much to think about right now." He nodded. "Fair enough. But Clara, for what it's worth, I think he's right. You belong here." As he walked away to join the cleanup crew, Clara turned back to her patients, but her mind kept circling back to his words, to Doc Morrison's offer, to the way the townspeople had looked at her tonight with respect, gratitude, acceptance. Later that night, back at her mother's house, Clara sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, trying to process everything. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. "It's open," she called, too tired to get up. Martha Davies entered, followed somewhat surprisingly by Reverend Mills and his wife, Agnes Morrison, and several other members of the church board. "Sorry to bother you so late," Martha said, "but this couldn't wait." "What's wrong?" Clara half rose from her chair. "Nothing's wrong," Reverend Mills assured her. "Please, sit. We've come with a proposal." Agnes Morrison leaned forward. "My husband told us about his plans to retire, about his suggestion that you take over his practice." Clara nodded warily. "We want you to know that you have the full support of the church and the Women's Aid Society," Mrs. Mills said. "Whatever you need to establish yourself here, help with the clinic, living arrangements, even financial assistance if required." I don't know what to say." "Say you'll think about it," Martha urged. "This town's been without proper medical care too many times. We can't afford to lose you." Reverend Mills cleared his throat. "There's one more thing. We've been discussing your situation with some of the town council. There are those who still harbor reservations about your family's past." Clara's heart sank. "I see." "However," the Reverend continued, "we believe those voices are in the minority. To help settle the matter, we'd like to propose something this Sunday. After services, we'd like you to give a talk about modern medical practices, particularly regarding children's health. Many of our mothers are eager to learn. You want me to speak in church? In the church hall, Agnes clarified. It would give people a chance to see you in a different light, to understand that you're here to help, not to cause trouble. Clara looked around at these people who had once shunned her family, now offering support and acceptance. All right, she heard herself say. I'll do it. After they left, Clara remained at the table, staring at the cold tea. Everything was moving so fast. 3 weeks ago, she'd come here planning to stay just long enough to sell the house. Now she was being offered a life, a purpose, a place in the community. And Clay, always Clay, hovering at the edges of every decision, every possibility. Unable to sit still any longer, she grabbed her shawl and stepped onto the porch. The night was clear. Stars scattered across the sky like spilled salt. In the distance, she could see the glow from the mine where work continued. Can't sleep either. She wasn't surprised to find Clay approaching from the road. Somehow, she'd expected him. Too much to think about, she admitted. He joined her on the porch, maintaining a respectful distance. Heard about the church board's visit. News travels fast. It's a small town. He was quiet for a moment. You going to do it, the talk? I said yes. And Doc Morrison's offer. Clara wrapped the shawl tighter around her shoulders. I don't know. It's a big decision. What's holding you back? She turned to look at him. This man who'd been boy and friend and almost something more. You know what's holding me back. Do I? Clay, if I stay, if I take over Doc's practice, make a real life here, things between us can't remain undefined. It wouldn't be fair to either of us. He nodded slowly. You're right. So where does that leave us? Clay removed his hat, running his hand through his hair in that familiar gesture. I told you at the festival how I feel. That hasn't changed, won't change. But I meant what I said about giving you time. And if I need more time than you can give, then I'll wait longer. He met her eyes. Clara, I waited 10 years without even knowing if I'd see you again. I can wait as long as it takes for you to trust us again. That's not fair to you. Let me decide what's fair for me. He stood, settling his hat back on his head. Just think about staying. Not for me, but for yourself. For the life you could build here. After he left, Clara remained on the porch until the chill drove her inside, in her old room. She pulled out paper and began making notes for Sunday's talk. If she was going to do this, she'd do it right. But as she wrote about preventing childhood diseases and treating common ailments, her mind kept drifting to other possibilities. A proper clinic, a home of her own. Sunday dinners with the church ladies who were slowly becoming friends, and Clay patient, steadfast Clay, who looked at her like she was worth waiting for. Maybe Doc Morrison was right. Maybe she did belong here. The thought terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. The church hall was packed for Clara's talk, with more people than she'd expected filling every available seat. Some stood along the walls, and she recognized faces from neighboring farms who rarely came to town. Her hands trembled slightly as she arranged her notes at the simple podium. Deep breaths, Martha whispered from her seat in the front row. You've got this. Clara nodded, forcing herself to look out at the assembled crowd. She spotted Clay near the back, his encouraging smile helping settle her nerves. Taking one final breath, she began. Thank you all for coming. Today I'd like to share some practical knowledge about keeping our children healthy, especially as we head into summer when certain ailments become more common. She spoke about recognizing signs of heat exhaustion, treating insect bites and stings, the importance of clean water, and basic hygiene to prevent the spread of disease. Gradually, her nervousness faded as she warmed to her subject. Mothers leaned forward, taking mental notes. Even some of the men seemed engaged. Now, I know some of you may have concerns about herbal remedies versus traditional medicine, Clara said, addressing the elephant in the room. The truth is, both have their place. Many of our modern medicines come from plants. Willow bark gives us aspirin for pain. Foxglove provides digitalis for heart conditions. The key is knowing when to use which treatment and when to seek additional help. She was demonstrating how to properly clean a wound when the hall doors burst open. William Grady strode in, followed by a man Clara didn't recognize, well-dressed, with the bearing of someone important. "So sorry to interrupt," Grady said, though his tone suggested otherwise. "But I thought folks should meet Mr. Harrison from the Territorial Medical Board." Clara's blood ran cold. The medical board had the power to shut down any practitioner they deemed unqualified. "Miss Winslow," Harrison said, stepping forward, "I've received a complaint about you practicing medicine without proper certification." The hall erupted in murmurs. Clara gripped the podium to steady herself. "I've never claimed to be a doctor," she said, proud that her voice remained steady. "I'm an herbalist and midwife, trained by—" "Training is all well and good," Harrison interrupted. "But do you have documentation certificates? Any proof of your qualifications?" Clara's heart sank. Her mentor in Montana had been a traditional healer, passing down knowledge through practice, not papers. "I have letters of recommendation from the families I've helped." "Testimonials aren't credentials. Miss Winslow." "Now hold on." Doc Morrison stood up, leaning heavily on his cane. "I've been practicing medicine in this territory for 40 years. Mr. Harrison, I've seen plenty of certified doctors who couldn't diagnose a head cold, and I've seen natural healers who could work miracles. Clara Winslow falls into the latter category. Be that as it may." "I wasn't finished." Doc Morrison's voice carried the authority of age and experience. "This young woman has assisted me on numerous cases. She's shown more skill and knowledge than many medical school graduates I've known. If you're here to evaluate her abilities, then do it properly. Test her knowledge. Don't just demand papers." Harrison looked taken aback. "That's irregular." "So is showing up to ambush someone during a community health talk," Reverend Mills said, rising as well. "If you have concerns, Mr. Harrison, perhaps we should address them properly. Not like this." "I agree." Sheriff Thompson stepped forward. "This seems more like harassment than official business." Harrison glanced at Grady, who was clearly not expecting this unified response. "Very well. Miss Winslow, would you consent to an examination of your medical knowledge tomorrow? Say, at the clinic?" "Of course," Clara said, though her stomach churned at the thought. "Good. 2 o'clock. I'll bring a certified physician to assist in the evaluation." Harrison tipped his hat. "Good day." After he left, Grady lingering just long enough to shoot Clara a triumphant look, the hall fell silent. "Well," Clara said, forcing a smile, "where were we? Yes, proper wound cleaning." She finished her talk, but the atmosphere had changed. People were supportive but worried, and Clara couldn't blame them. If she failed tomorrow's examination, she'd be forbidden from practicing any kind of medicine in the territory. As the crowd dispersed, offering encouragement and promises of prayer, Clara began gathering her supplies with shaking hands. "That was a low blow, even for Grady," Clay said, appearing at her side. "He's not wrong, though I don't have formal certification." Clara's voice was barely above a whisper. "What if I fail? What if—" "You won't fail." His certainty made her look up. "Clara, I've seen you work. You know more about healing than half the certified doctors in the territory. Knowledge isn't always enough. They'll want to see technique, formal terminology. Then we'll help you prepare." Martha joined them, along with Doc Morrison and several others. "Doc can coach you on the formal terms tonight. I have medical texts you can review," Agnes Morrison added, "and my husband's old examination notes from medical school." I'll organize everything. Mrs. Mills offered, "We'll set up at Martha's boarding house and work through the night if necessary." Clara looked around at these people rallying to her aid, and tears pricked her eyes. "Why are you all doing this?" "Because you're one of us now," Martha said simply, "and we take care of our own." The rest of the day passed in a blur of intensive study. Doc Morrison drilled her on anatomy and formal medical procedures, while Agnes quizzed her on disease names and treatments. Martha kept everyone fed and coffee flowing, while other townspeople stopped by with encouragement and offers of help. Clay appeared around sunset with law books. "Medical board has to follow territorial regulations," he explained. "There are limits to what they can ask, procedures they have to follow. Thought you should know your rights." "I can't believe you're all doing this," Clara said during a brief break. "Grady overplayed his hand," Doc Morrison said with satisfaction. "He thought he could run you out of town with intimidation. Instead, he's united everyone behind you." Late that night, when the others had gone home, Clay remained to help Clara review one last time. They sat at Martha's kitchen table, medical books spread between them. "My eyes are crossing," Clara finally admitted, rubbing her temples. "You need rest. Tomorrow will be challenging enough without you being exhausted." "I can't sleep. Too nervous." Clay reached across the table, taking her hand. "Listen to me. You've already proven yourself to this town. Tomorrow is just a formality." "What if it's not? What if they're determined to fail me no matter what?" "Then we'll fight it. Appeal to the territorial governor if we have to." His thumb traced circles on her palm. "Clara, you're not alone in this anymore. Win or lose tomorrow, this town is behind you. I'm behind you." "Why?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. "Why do you still care so much after everything?" Clay was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was soft. "My PA used to say that some people are like deep roots, no matter how far the tree grows or which way the wind blows. Those roots stay true. You're my deep root, Clara, always have been." The intimacy of the moment, the gentle pressure of his hand on hers, made Clara's heart race. "Clay!" "I know, not the time." He squeezed her hand once before letting go. "Come on, I'll walk you home. You need whatever sleep you can get." The next afternoon, Clara arrived at her clinic to find Harrison already there with another man-doctor, Pemberton from the territorial capital. They'd rearranged her carefully organized space, setting up an examination area. "Miss Winslow," Harrison greeted her coolly. "Shall we begin?" For the next 2 hours, they grilled her mercilessly. They presented hypothetical cases, asked her to diagnose conditions, demonstrate procedures. They questioned her about dosages, contraindications, surgical techniques she'd never claimed to know. Clara answered as best she could, falling back on her practical experience when formal knowledge failed her. When Pemberton asked about a complicated surgical procedure, she said honestly, "I wouldn't attempt that. I'd stabilize the patient and transport them to a qualified surgeon." "At least you know your limitations," Pemberton muttered, making notes. Finally, Harrison presented one last scenario. A child presents with high fever, stiff neck, sensitivity to light, your diagnosis and treatment. Clara's mind raced. Possible meningitis. I'd try to reduce the fever with cool compresses and willow bark tea while arranging immediate transport to a hospital. I'd also isolate the patient to prevent possible spread and notify other families to watch for symptoms. Harrison and Pemberton exchanged glances. "Wait outside, please," Harrison said. Clara stepped out to find a crowd gathered. Word had spread, and half the town seemed to be there. Clay stood near the door, his presence steadying. "How did it go?" Martha asked anxiously. "I don't know. They're deciding now." The minutes stretched endlessly. Then the door opened and Harrison emerged, his expression unreadable. "After thorough examination," he began, and Clara held her breath. We find that while Miss Winslow lacks formal certification, her practical knowledge and judgment are sound. More importantly, she demonstrates clear understanding of her limitations and when to refer patients to more qualified practitioners. Clara sagged with relief as he continued. Therefore, we're issuing a provisional herbalist and midwife license, with the stipulation that Miss Winslow work under Dr. Morrison's supervision for 6 months and not attempt any surgical procedures beyond basic wound care. The crowd erupted in cheers. Clara found herself embraced by Martha, then Agnes, then what seemed like half the town. Through the celebration, she saw Grady slinking away, defeat written across his face. Additionally, Pemberton said, raising his voice over the noise, I'll be recommending Miss Winslow for a scholarship to attend formal medical training, should she wish to pursue full certification. Clara gasped, Thank you both. Harrison's stern expression softened slightly. Thank Dr. Morrison. His testimony carried significant weight, and thank your community, I've rarely seen such unified support. He tipped his hat. Good day, Miss Winslow. Use your skills wisely. As the officials left and the celebration continued, Clara felt overwhelmed by the turn of events. She'd come to Dust Rock to close a chapter of her life. Instead, she'd opened a new one, filled with possibilities she'd never imagined. Later, as the crowd dispersed and quiet returned to the clinic, Clara found Clay waiting on the porch. Congratulations, he said softly, though I never doubted the outcome. I did, every second. I know. He stepped closer. Clara, I need to tell you something. Clay... No, let me say this. He took her hands in his. I know you've been hurt. I know trust doesn't come easy. But watching you these past weeks, seeing you fight for your place here, seeing this town fight for you, it's made me realize something. What's that? That love isn't just about feelings. It's about choosing someone every day, even when it's hard, even when they're scared, even when they might run. He squeezed her hands gently. I choose you, Clara. Have since we were kids. Will until my last breath. But I need to know, is there any chance you might choose me too? Not today, maybe not tomorrow, but someday. Clara looked into his eyes, seeing the boy who'd taught her to fish, the young man who'd searched for her, the patient deputy who'd waited 10 years for this moment. Her carefully constructed walls, already weakened by the town's acceptance, finally crumbled entirely. I already have, she whispered. I'm just terrified of what that means. Then be terrified, Clay said, pulling her closer. Be terrified with me, but don't let fear keep us apart any longer. Standing there in the fading light, surrounded by the life she was building in the place she'd once fled, Clara made her choice. Not just about Clay, but about everything the town, the practice, the future stretching ahead like an unwritten page. All right, she said, and his answering smile was like sunrise after the longest night. All right. The morning sun cast long shadows across Main Street as Clara made her final decision. She stood in the doorway of Henderson's Mercantile, a telegraph form clutched in her hand. The message was simple. Not coming. Found home. C. Winslow. It was addressed to the boarding house in Denver where she'd planned to relocate. Sending that today, Mrs.? Henderson asked, her tone noticeably warmer than it had been weeks ago. Yes. Clara handed over the form with a sense of finality. I'm staying. The older woman smiled. Good. Town needs you. Speaking of which, young Tommy Baxter's been scratching at mosquito bites until they're raw. His mama's beside herself. Tell her to bring him by. I have a salve that will help with the itching and prevent infection. As Clara left the store, she nearly collided with Thomas Garrett, who was running full tilt down the boardwalk. Miss Clara. He skidded to a stop, breathing hard. There's trouble at your place. That Mr. Grady and some men. Clara didn't wait to hear more. She hurried toward her house. finding a disturbing scene in her front yard. William Grady stood there with 3 other men, one of whom was nailing a notice to her gate post. "What's the meaning of this?" Clara demanded. Grady turned with a cold smile. "Just serving notice. Miss Winslow. Seems there's a lien on this property. Your father borrowed money before his departure. Never paid it back. With interest, the debt's substantial." Clara's heart sank as she read the notice. The amount was more than she could possibly pay. "This is convenient timing," she said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "The law's the law," Grady said with false sympathy. "You have 30 days to pay in full, or the property goes to auction. Of course, I'd be willing to buy it directly, save you the embarrassment, for a fair price, naturally. Your definition of fair and mine likely differ, Mr. Grady. Perhaps, but it's better than losing everything at auction." He tipped his hat mockingly. 30 days. Miss Winslow, good day." After they left, Clara sank onto the porch steps, the notice crumpled in her hand. She'd been so focused on building a future here, she'd never considered the past might have claims on her property. "Clara!" She looked up to find Clay approaching, his expression grim. "I heard what happened. Tom came to get me, but I was dealing with a dispute at the saloon." "It doesn't matter. The debt's real. I found the papers in my father's desk weeks ago." "I just hoped—" She shook her head. "I was foolish to think I could stay. How much?" When she told him the amount, he whistled low. "That's highway robbery with that interest rate." "Legal highway robbery, apparently." Clara stood, squaring her shoulders. "I'll have to sell after all. Maybe I can get enough to pay the debt and still have something left to start over elsewhere." "No." The firmness in Clay's voice made her blink. "No." "You're not running again. Not this time." He took the notice from her, studying it. "There has to be another way." "Clay, be realistic. I don't have that kind of money. The house is all I have." "Then we'll find another solution." He folded the paper carefully. "I'm taking this to Judge Patterson. There might be legal options we haven't considered. And if there aren't—" He met her eyes steadily. "Then we'll face that when we come to it. But you're not facing it alone." That evening, Clara tried to focus on her patients, but her mind kept circling back to the notice. She was checking on the Baxter boys' mosquito bites when Martha burst in. "Emergency town meeting," the older woman announced. "Right now. Church Hall." "Martha, I have patience." "They'll wait. This is about you." Confused, Clara followed Martha to the church hall, which was already packed. Mayor Hutchins stood at the front, and Clara's stomach dropped when she saw the notice in his hand. "Folks," the mayor began, "we've got a situation. As many of you have heard, there's a lien on the Winslow property." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Clara wanted to sink through the floor. "Now," the mayor continued, "we could let this play out according to law, or we could remember that we're a community, and communities take care of their own." "What are you suggesting, Mayor?" someone called out. It was Doc Morrison who stood to answer. "I'm suggesting we buy the debt ourselves, collectively. Give Miss Winslow fair terms to pay it back over time, without losing her home." "That's charity." Elijah Pratt objected. "Why should we bail out the Winslows?" "It's not charity," Agnes Morrison said firmly. "It's an investment. Clara provides a vital service to this town. Losing her would cost us more in the long run than helping her now. The woman saved my grandson." "Mrs." Patterson added. "That's worth more than money to me." One by one, people began standing, voicing support. The Olsons, the Jamesons, even Mrs. Abernathy spoke in Clara's favor. But it was Judge Patterson who provided the most surprising support. "I've reviewed the original loan documents," he said, producing a file. "The interest rate Grady's claiming is usurious, legally questionable at best. If the town holds the debt instead, we can set fair terms." "How much would each family need to contribute?" Henrik Olsen asked practically. The mayor did quick calculations. If 50 families participate, about $12 each. I'll pledge 20, Martha declared. 30 from us, the Morrisons added. Clara stood frozen as pledges rang out across the hall. These people, some of whom had shunned her just weeks ago, were offering their hard-earned money to help her. Stop, she finally managed to say. Please, I can't let you all— You can and you will, Reverend Mills said kindly. Consider it a loan. If that makes you feel better, pay us back by continuing to heal our sick and deliver our babies. But all in favor of the town collectively purchasing the Winslow debt Mayor Hutchins called? The ayes were overwhelming. Motion carried. Mr. Grady will be notified tomorrow that his claim has been satisfied by the town treasury. As the meeting disbanded, Clara found herself surrounded by well-wishers. She tried to thank each person individually, but there were too many, and her eyes kept filling with tears. Clay appeared at her elbow as the crowd thinned. Come on, he said gently. Let's get you some air. They walked to the quiet cemetery behind the church, where Clara's mother lay beneath a simple stone. Clara knelt, placing her hand on the marker. She would have been overwhelmed, Clara said softly. To see the town come together like that. She would have been proud, Clay corrected. To see how you've brought them together. I didn't. You did, by being yourself, by helping without judgment, by staying when it got hard. He helped her to her feet. Grady thought he could use the past to drive you out. Instead, he helped you put it to rest. They stood together in the peaceful cemetery, the evening star just becoming visible overhead. Clara thought about all the time she'd planned to leave, all the moments she'd almost run. I received an interesting telegram today, Clay said suddenly, from the sheriff in Billings. Seems they arrested a land speculator up there for fraudulent loans. Man named Josiah Grady. Clara turned sharply. Grady related to William. His cousin. Been working together for years, apparently, creating false debts, forcing families off their land. Clay's smile was grim. Sheriff's very interested in William's activities here. You mean the debt might not even be legitimate? Oh, it's real enough. Your father did borrow money. But the terms, the interest, the threats, those are another matter. Clay pulled out his watch. In fact, Sheriff Thompson should be having a conversation with Mr. Grady right about now. As if on cue, they heard commotion from the direction of town. Through the trees, they could see lanterns gathering near the jail. Did you plan this? Clara asked. I might have sent a few telegrams after seeing that notice. Made some inquiries. Clay shrugged. A good lawman always investigates irregularities. Clay Harlan, you promised not to fight my battles. I didn't fight anything, just asked a few questions. The good people of Dustrock fought for you all on their own. Clara looked at him. Really looked at him. This man who'd waited for her, searched for her, stood by her without pushing, fought for her without overstepping. The boy she'd loved had become a man worth loving even more. Thank you, she said simply. For what? For waiting, for caring, for being you. He stepped closer, his hand coming up to cup her cheek. Clara, Miss Clara Deputy Harlan, Thomas's voice carried across the cemetery. Sheriff wants you both. They've arrested Mr. Grady. Clay sighed. Duty calls. For both of us, apparently. But Clara caught his hand as he turned to go. Clay, when this is over, when things settle, ask me again. His brow furrowed. Ask you what? What you asked at the oak tree, about choosing. She squeezed his hand. Ask me again. Understanding dawned in his eyes, followed by a smile that made her heart race. I will. Count on it. They walked back to town together, hands linked, to find Main Street in an uproar. William Grady was being loaded into a prison wagon, shouting about conspiracies and threatening lawsuits. The debt scheme was just the tip of it. Sheriff Thompson told them. Found evidence he's been doctoring property lines, filing false claims. Half the county might have grievances. What about the lien on Clara's property? Clay asked. Invalid. The whole thing was a fraud. The sheriff turned to Clara. You'll need to file some paperwork, but the house is yours free and clear. Clara sagged with relief. In one day, she'd gone from nearly losing everything to having more than she'd ever dreamed: a home, a practice, a community, and the promise of something more with Clay. I'd say this calls for a celebration, Martha announced, appearing with several other ladies. Everyone to the boarding house. I've got apple pie and coffee. As the impromptu celebration moved down the street, Clara hung back, looking at the town that had become home in ways she'd never expected. The same buildings, the same dusty streets, but everything had changed. Or maybe she had. Are you coming? Clay asked, waiting for her. Yes. She took his offered arm. I'm exactly where I want to be. Later that night, after pie and coffee and more gratitude than she could properly express, Clara stood in her mother's house. Her house now, truly and legally. She walked through the rooms where she'd packed to leave so many times, each corner holding memories of fear and flight. Tomorrow she would unpack for good. She would hang curtains, plant flowers, make this place truly hers. She would continue building her practice, healing bodies and maybe hearts too. She would face whatever came next with courage instead of fear. And someday soon, when Clay asked again, she would say yes. Not because she owed him or the town anything, but because she had finally learned the difference between running from something and running toward something. She was done running from. It was time to run toward 1 year later. Spring had returned to Dust Rock with a vengeance. The apple trees behind Clara's house, she still had to remind herself it was truly hers, were heavy with blossoms. And her medicinal herb garden stretched in neat rows where her mother's flowers once grew. Clara stood at her bedroom window, brushing her hair in the morning light. Through the glass, she could see patients already gathering at the clinic. Doc Morrison had officially retired 6 months ago, and she'd been the town's primary healer ever since. The scholarship to formal medical training waited on her desk, but she'd deferred it twice now. There was too much work here, too many people depending on her. And there was Clay. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Come in, Martha, she called, recognizing the familiar rhythm. But it wasn't Martha who entered. Clay stood in her doorway, hat in hand, wearing his Sunday best despite it being Thursday. Clay, is something wrong? I thought you were helping with the barn raising at the Olson place. Will be, but I needed to see you first. He seemed nervous, turning his hat in circles. Clara, do you remember what you asked me that night after Grady was arrested? Clara's heart began to race. I remember. You said to ask you again, when things settled. He met her eyes. Things seem pretty settled now. Clay, let me finish. I've been carrying this around for weeks, trying to find the perfect moment. He reached into his vest pocket, pulling out a small velvet box. But I realized there's no perfect moment. There's just us, and this life we've been building together without even meaning to. Clara sank onto the edge of her bed, legs suddenly unsteady. What are you saying? Clay crossed the room and knelt before her, taking her hands in his. I'm saying that I love you, Clara Winslow. Have since we were kids catching fireflies by the creek. I'm saying that this past year, watching you heal this town and let it heal you, has been the greatest privilege of my life. He opened the box, revealing a simple gold ring with a small sapphire, her mother's ring. She realized with a start, the one she'd sold years ago to pay for her journey west. How did you? Tracked it down. Took some doing. But Judge Patterson helped. Your mother would have wanted you to have it. His voice grew soft. I'm asking you to marry me, Clara. Not because the town expects it, not because it's sensible, but because I can't imagine a single day without you in it. Clara looked at him, this patient, steadfast man who'd waited so long and felt the last of her walls crumble entirely. You know I'm difficult, stubborn, set in my ways. I know you're strong, independent, magnificent. His thumb traced circles on her palm. I'm not asking you to be less than you are. I'm asking to stand beside you while you become even more. I might want to take that scholarship eventually. Go away for training. Then I'll be here when you get back, or I'll go with you, if they'll let me. His gray eyes were serious. Clara, I'd follow you anywhere, but I'm hoping you'll choose to stay here, with me, and build something beautiful. Clara slipped from the bed to kneel with him, cupping his face in her hands. You beautiful, foolish man. Don't you know I already have? Is that a yes? That's a yes. She laughed through sudden tears. Yes, Clay Harlan, I'll marry you. His kiss was tender, full of years of waiting and hoping. When they finally pulled apart, he slipped the ring onto her finger with shaking hands. We should tell Martha. Clara said, she'll be insufferable if she's not the first to know. Too late for that. Clay grinned. Who do you think helped me get your mother's ring back? She's probably got half the town gathered downstairs already. Sure enough, when they descended the stairs, they found the parlor full of people. Martha stood at the center, beaming like a proud mother hen. Finally, she exclaimed. Do you know how hard it's been keeping this secret? The morning dissolved into congratulations and wedding planning. The ladies immediately began discussing dates and dresses while the men clapped Clay on the back and made jokes about him finally working up the nerve. Spring wedding. Agnes Morrison declared, when the wildflowers are blooming. Summer, Sarah Olson countered. After the planting's done. Fall, Mrs. Patterson suggested. When the heat breaks. Tomorrow, Clay said firmly, making everyone laugh. Though I suppose Clara should have some say. Clara looked around the room at these people who'd become family. A month from now, she decided. First Saturday in May, simple ceremony, reception here in the garden. A month. Martha looked scandalized. That's hardly enough time. It's been 10 years. Martha, I think we've waited long enough. The next few weeks passed in a whirlwind of preparations. Clara continued seeing patients while fielding constant questions about flowers, food, and festivities. Clay took to sleeping on her porch some nights, claiming he was keeping watch but really just wanting to be near. You know that's scandalous, Clara told him one evening, bringing him coffee as he settled into the porch chair with a blanket. Let them talk. He pulled her down beside him. Though I did tell folks I was watching for wild animals. Technically true, Thomas Garrett's been known to get rowdy after too much drink. They sat in comfortable silence, watching stars appear one by one. Clara twisted her mother's ring, still getting used to its weight. Any regrets? Clay asked softly. About what? Staying, choosing this life instead of something grander. Clara considered the question. A year ago, she'd had planned San Francisco. Maybe, or back east where no one knew her story. A fresh start in a place without memories. No, she said finally. No regrets. This is grander than anything I imagined. It's real. The night before the wedding, Clara couldn't sleep. She wandered her house, touching familiar objects, amazed at how much had changed. In her father's old study, her office, now she found a letter she'd started to him months ago but never sent. Dear Papa, it began. I used to be so angry at you for what you did to our family. But I understand now that people make mistakes, that desperation drives good folks to poor choices. I've learned that redemption isn't about erasing the past, but about building something better from its ashes. She folded the letter carefully and placed it in the drawer. Someday, when he was released, she'd give it to him. For now, it was enough to have written it. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Can't sleep either. She turned to find Clay in the doorway. You shouldn't be here. Bad luck to see the bride before the wedding. That's just the wedding day? We've got, he checked his pocket watch, 3 hours yet. Clay Harlan, you're splitting hairs. One of my many talents. He grew serious. Are you all right having doubts? No doubts, just thinking about how we got here. All the twists and turns. Worth it, though. Every single one. The wedding day dawned perfect clear skies. Gentle breeze, the whole town turned out in their finest. Clara wore her mother's wedding dress, carefully altered by Sarah Olson. Martha fussed with her hair while Agnes applied a touch of rouge to her cheeks. You look beautiful, Martha said, tears in her eyes. Your mother would be so proud. Through the window, Clara could see guests gathering in the garden. The herb beds provided a fragrant backdrop, and wildflowers decorated every surface. Clay stood at the makeshift altar with Reverend Mills, looking handsome and only slightly nervous. Ready? Thomas Garrett asked. He'd been chosen to give her away, having declared himself her honorary brother. Ready, Clara confirmed. The walk through the garden seemed both endless and too quick. Clara saw faces she'd come to love, the Olsons, the Pattersons, Doc Morrison wiping his eyes, even Mrs. Abernathy sniffling into a handkerchief, her community, her family of choice. But mostly she saw Clay, his eyes locked on hers, his smile brighter than the spring sun. The ceremony was simple, the vows traditional with a few personal additions. When Clay promised to support her calling as a healer, to stand by her through sickness and health, both professional and personal, Clara had to blink back tears. I promise to choose you every day, Clara said in return, to trust in us even when I'm scared, to build a life with you that honors both our pasts and our future. When Reverend Mills pronounced them husband and wife, the cheer that went up could probably be heard in the next county. The reception lasted well into the evening. Tables groaned under the weight of donated dishes. The fiddlers played until their fingers ached, and dancing continued until stars filled the sky. Clara changed partners countless times, but always returned to Clay, who held her like he'd never let go. As the celebration wound down, Clara found herself on the porch with her new husband, watching their guests slowly disperse. No regrets? Clay asked, echoing his question from days before. None, Clara assured him. This is exactly where I belong. Good, because I have one more surprise. He produced an envelope from his pocket. Wedding present. Inside was a deed. Clara read it twice before the words sank in. The Grady place? He had to sell it to pay legal fees. I thought we could use the land to expand your herb gardens, maybe build a proper hospital someday. Clay, we can't afford. We can. I've been saving for 10 years, hoping you'd come home. Figured I'd better put it to good use. Clara threw her arms around him, laughing and crying at once. You impossible, wonderful man. Is that a yes to the hospital? That's a yes to everything. The hospital, the gardens, the future, all of it. Later, as they stood in the doorway of their home, Clay suddenly grinned. What? Clara asked. Just remembering something I said once, about sleeping outside if you said no. But I didn't say no. No, he agreed, pulling her close. You said yes, finally. Worth the wait. Worth everything. Clara Harlan, worth everything. As they went inside together, Clara thought about the girl who'd fled this town in shame and fear. That girl could never have imagined this love. Acceptance, purpose, home. Sometimes the longest journeys led you right back where you started, but with new eyes to see the beauty that was always there. The door closed behind them, and somewhere in the distance, a lone cowboy sang a love song to the stars, his voice carrying across the prairie like a benediction on all second chances and hearts that find their way home. Thank you so much for listening to this emotional Wild West love story. I hope Clara and Clay's journey touched your heart as much as it touched mine. Please leave a comment below sharing where you're listening from. I love connecting with listeners from around the world and hearing your thoughts on the story. If you enjoyed this tale of second chances and true love conquering all, please subscribe to Wild West Stories 1850 and hit that like button. And don't forget to press the hype button to help more people discover these heartfelt stories from the American frontier. Until our next adventure in the Old West, partners,